This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Now, continuing our look at the U.S. government versus Huawei, the Trump administration assured Congress that federal agencies will meet a 2-year deadline to comply with a ban on deals with the Chinese telecom maker. That means the government can't enter into contracts with Huawei or buy gear from them. The bill that prohibits those deals was passed in 2018 with a 2-year time frame for implementation. And Friday, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen threw his support behind it on Bloomberg Television.
I support that decision because I do think this is a critical national security issue. In all my conversations with the intelligence community, they've made clear that if Huawei is allowed to dominate the 5G infrastructure of the future around the world, that will compromise our national security interests and those of our allies.
Our next guest is no stranger to international disputes and trying to resolve them. Anja Manuel is a co-founder and principal at the strategic consulting firm Rice, Hadley & Gates. She is also a lecturer at Stanford University, and prior to that, she served in the U.S. State Department. Anja, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So, is the U.S. taking the right stance on Huawei?
I think two things. Huawei is a problem in 5G, and we're overreaching. So, on the 5G networks, as you know better than anyone, it's going to run all of our communications going forward and the Internet of Things. And you don't want any one company, Chinese or not, with the ability to mess with our electricity grid or tell all the self-driving cars to veer off the road. So that part is the right thing to do. But this executive order that's just come out that says, for example, Google can't put Android on Huawei phones, I think is overreaching. I haven't heard any security experts say that Huawei phones are a problem in any way.
Well, you know, the U.S. government seems to be concerned about national security, concerned about espionage. I spoke to a U.S. government official last week who actually has oversight into the U.S. position on Huawei, and he never admitted, though I did ask several times quite explicitly, if there was evidence of espionage, but he continued to say that Huawei is perfectly capable of espionage and interfering with U.S. national security if left to its own devices. And so let's say we don't have evidence of espionage. Given that Huawei is capable of this, potentially, is it the right tact?
Well, this is the difficulty on 5G. It's like saying someone has a gun, but they haven't shot it yet. So the capability that any one company that creates all the 5G networks around the world will have to spy is enormous, and Huawei has been caught spying before, so I think we're right to be worried about that aspect of it.
Meantime, earlier on Bloomberg Television, we spoke with Senator Rick Scott of Florida, talking about the U.S.-China trade war. He took quite an extreme position. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I don't think any American should buy one Chinese product. We should not do any business with China. We should not buy anything from China. We have to understand they are our arch enemy.
Which basically means no American should buy 90% of anything that's in Walmart.
Yes. I worry about that, and I disagree 100% with that position. Our best case scenario would be where we compete with China, but we realize that they're going to be a competitor in lots of different areas, but we don't build a wall. We can't shut them out entirely. It's our fastest growing export market. As you mentioned, Walmart, Boeing sells a quarter of its planes to China. If that market is closed to us, hundreds of thousands of Americans are going to lose their jobs. So the idea that we're going to completely decouple these two economies, to me, makes no sense.
Well, some would argue that China has already cut off many U.S. companies from operating in China, shut down Facebook, shut down Twitter, Google has left the country. So what substance is there to this argument that we're already in the middle of a tech Cold War with China?
The technology competition is real, and I think we're waking up to it a little bit late. You know, Chinese have been stealing our trade secrets. They're encouraging some students at U.S. universities to spy. They're handing over intellectual property the price of doing business in China. So all of those things are problematic and need to be stopped. Completely stopping doing any business with China, like we're starting to do, isn't the answer. The answer is we got to compete. We need to support our own R&D. We need to get better at STEM research. We need to create a fair playing field for tech. You mentioned it. They're not letting our companies in, so we should be doing that. But instead of picking trade fights with every other ally, we should be working with them to work against China's most mercantilist impulses. I don't see much evidence of that.
What would some concrete steps be then in your plan, working with other allies to work against China?
So I listed some of them. For starters, we should have joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which both the Bush administration and the Obama administration supported and negotiated. The Trump administration pulled out of it. Really importantly, we should take the lead in setting the global values for technology. We're nowhere on this. You know, after World War II, we created the IAEA on nuclear power. We created the World Health Organization. We need to be doing the same thing on ethics and AI, bioethics, all of those things where China is neck and neck with us, and they're setting the standards and we're not. That's not a good.
Meantime, the cover story of this week's issue of Bloomberg Business Week has to do with Chinese cancer researchers in the United States. And the United States, it appears, has pushed some of these researchers out of their positions. Some of them have actually gone back to China. Is that too extreme?
Yeah, this is a perfect example of the overreach and where this is difficult to get right. So it is 100% clear that the Chinese Communist Party is encouraging some Chinese students and researchers in the US and elsewhere to spy. It's clear. Does that mean all of them are spies? Absolutely not. And in my view, the answer isn't xenophobia, which we're leaning towards. You know, your story says, I think something like the FBI is prosecuting all of these Chinese American scientists, and they're finding that many of them are completely patriotic Americans and haven't done anything wrong. So we do need to crack down hard on people who are a problem, but keeping Chinese students out of our universities and telling all the researchers to go home isn't the right way to go about it.
Do you have concerns this could spread to other countries? For example, India is considering raising tariffs on U.S. imports.
The India situation on trade is a little bit different. So India, we've just canceled the GSP, the system of preferences, which allows them to bring things in at preferential rates because they're still considered a developing country. India is pretty protectionist, but this is part of what we were talking about a minute ago. We in the U.S. seem to be picking fights with everyone, including our allies, when actually we should be working with India and Japan and Israel and Europe to say, hey, China, here's where you're overreaching and being too mercantilist, and we're going to check you as a group, but we're all going to work together.
All right, Anja Manuel of Rice Hadley Gates. You also gave a TEDx talk that's worth watching about the U.S.-China tech Cold War. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for stopping by.